Do you have any thoughts on kind of what the obligation is to the client in this whole relationship that seems to be missing?
Unfortunately, and somebody told me this years ago, he said companies hire consultants so they have somebody that they can sue when things go wrong, which I thought was cynical, but there's an element of truth to that because the uninformed buyer is just trying to transfer their risk, which is okay, but transfer their responsibility, which is not okay. Transfer the risk, sure, bring in the pros, but don't give up your responsibility.
Welcome to 5 Minutes, your quick dive into the wide-ranging world of insurance, technology, and leadership. I'm Miguel Edwards, and I'll be your guide as we explore these topics that are transforming not just the insurance industry, but the business world at large. Along with sharing observations I've made over the span of my career in insurance, technology, and operations, I'll be chatting with some of the brightest minds in business and leadership. Whether you're a seasoned executive or a rising star, an industry expert, or just curious about how technology is revolutionizing insurance, this is your perfect spot for your weekly dose of insights. This is 5 Minutes.
Rob, I mean, the thing that really prompted me to want to have you on the show is, we had a conversation, a little half-hour conversation. I was on LinkedIn. I'm like, hey, haven't chatted with Robin a little bit and just dropped you a note, and you were agreeable. We got on a quick session, and by the way, I mean, to talk about consulting, you gave me some really interesting advice in that really short period of time. It really was more along the lines of encouragement, I would say, as I was kind of on this journey. When I was still on this journey trying to build a business that an extraordinary amount about, and then you send me your book. And your book, by the way, shows up like less than a week later. Most people say, oh yeah, I'm going to send you something. And, maybe it shows, maybe it doesn't. But diligently, this book shows up in my mailbox. And I got to be honest with you, Rob, I get books and kind of, all right, I'll get to it. And I read the intro and I was captivated. Nice. I was absolutely captivated. I devoured this thing in a weekend. My wife was pissed because I'm on the terrace right outside our room, and I wouldn't come inside. I'm just reading this book, and we're going to get into the content and talk a little bit about that. But one of the things that was really striking to me is how well researched it is, and you meld historical context with your message. So I'm getting a history lesson about stuff. I
Sure.
was in the second grade when the space shuttle Challenger blew up, and I was a TV in a corner of and as you're telling this story about the Challenger and the cause, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, yeah, this makes sense. I was just enthralled, and so the quality of your writing, it's just absolutely fascinating. But here's the thing that struck me most: I feel like you wrote the book to me. And like I felt like it was a letter that you were writing to me as a new consultant coming into this industry. And it was a little bit of some encouragement. It was some warning. There was a lot of really, really impressive writing that I just can't wait to jump into. But before we get into the book, I think it would be important just for everybody to get some context about your journey, kind of what you do, what got you into this industry. Why did you pick consulting? All of that stuff. Just take us through, kind of Berg beginning to now.
Phew, that's a long history. Let's just go back 30 years or so. So I as a young buck in Manhattan, I was very interested in consulting, having met some folks who worked for McKinsey and Bain and BCG, all those big firms, and I had no shot. I was writing business plans on the side as a freelancer to make my living, and it was feast or famine. I mean, some months would be big windfalls, and then I'd go months at a time with spaghetti for dinner, basically. But I was really determined to become a consultant. So I would, whatever money I could scrape together, I'd go visit the old McGraw-Hill bookstore on 6th Avenue, and the books in there, by the way, were, even back then, 30 years ago, were $50, $60, $70. So it was a meaningful amount of money for me to scrape together and then go buy a book. And then I would devour it, whether it was on business planning or leveraged buyouts or mergers and acquisitions or whatever the subject was. And every few months I would buy a book until I wound up with a pretty significant collection. And that's how I got my business education, prior to actually going to graduate school, finally going to graduate school years later. So I made my living writing business plans. And when the dot-com era came upon us in the late 90s, I connected with a few really creative types and brought a consulting angle to their web and software application development company. There were 4 guys in a room in Lower Manhattan. And the consulting angle was, I said, guys, before we try to solicit a sale for a website development or an application, let's run them through some paces. Let's check the viability of their business model. Let's do a creative audit. Let's do a technical audit. Again, this being in the late 90s, early 2000s, it wasn't just plug and play like it is today. If you wanted a commerce engine, you had to build a commerce engine from scratch. There were no great bells and whistles. There was HTML2 or 3, probably HTML2 back then, right, that we were using, which was a great advancement. And one of our clients approached me to join them in California. They kind of stole me away from this little startup that I was working with and helped, who, by the way, went from $5,000 jobs to $200,000 jobs as a result of gaining some of these sensibilities, this consulting mindset, if you will. And then I joined this firm in Irvine, California. And there were actually 2 entities. One I joined as chief operating officer, a startup marketing firm with a kind of a technology focus. And the other was an ISP that they were creating. So again, I put on my consulting hat and worked to help develop these nascent businesses, and was again approached after 3 years doing that by an old friend of mine from college. He had moved out to California and started a consulting firm called Perr in 1994. And he had, in the span of 10 years, he had become fabulously successful. Like he's living in Pacific Palisades. He was making 7 figures. He was just doing very, very well. And he invited me to join the firm. And I laughed, and we finished our bottle of wine, and I went home. And then I thought about it, and I probably called him. It was probably a month or 2 or 3 later. I said, "Were you serious about that?" And he said, "Yeah, I think so. Why don't we have lunch?" So we had lunch, and my current career was born 20 years ago. It'll be 20 years this October. And in that span, I was kind of handed enough rope to hang myself with, and built in that span of time what is the fastest growing and second largest practice in the firm. The Perr operations and technology consulting practice focuses primarily in the data world, just because of the nature of the work that is demanded by insurance companies, especially now. So a lot of focus on data management, a lot of focus on statistical reporting and enabling statistical reporting for insurance companies. We also help our clients with product definitions that get handed off to development teams to configure policy administration systems. We help with vendor selection. We work quite a bit in process design. And of particular interest to me is how you kind of can introduce artificial intelligence components into those workflows where they fit. But I would say 90% or 80% of our work right now is in the data world, just data modeling, setting up, cloud-based databases, conditioning data, making it ready and available for either management reporting through BI tools or statistical reporting to the various rating bureaus and agencies, et cetera, that require insurance companies to report.
Got it. Well, yeah, and I guess you and I share a lot in that, because those are similar areas that we focus on, and you'll get no argument from me around the importance of needing to really focus on a strong data foundation. It's something that, even at my career as a CIO, I've always been after that holy grail of being able to turn data into information and then using that as a sort of competitive advantage. Yet, as intuitive as that would sound, it seems incredibly hard to sell that as a value proposition in the insurance operation. You would think that the insurance operation would say, "Hey, give me that," and it's not quite that way.
It wasn't sexy,
Right.
It's foundational, but I think it's becoming sexier with the advent of, not the advent, I mean, the popularity of AI
Right.
in insurance and the huge data demands
Sure.
that are required to inform these large language models. And so it's starting, people are really starting to take note.
Yeah, 100%. And I would add that there are otherwise these incredibly difficult limitations to being able to adopt component type or point type solutions when you don't have a strong data foundation and integration architecture to be able to get at your data. All the
Exactly.
insurtech stuff that comes out on the scene, you can't take advantage of that stuff if your data is not in order. So. Exactly.
And I mentioned the startup I joined in Irvine, California, 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago now. My thought, my proselytizing to the senior leadership team there was, because we were marketing, if you own the data, you own the client in a sense. Like if you can get your arms around their data and help them make sense of it, they will love you forever. Because that's the biggest problem that they're wrestling with. So that applied as much in the marketing world as it does in the insurance industry.
I want to jump into the book, Rob, because this again. I mean, just the impact that it's had in the it's kind of the roadmap for kind of how I'm trying to build now the second phase here of my career, my new show here and my company, and one of the things that occurs to me as I was reading your book is you almost show up as a kind of a champion for consultants looking to protect what should be this kind of this sacrosanct career that has just been bastardized and destroyed by a bunch of people who call themselves consultants. I want to ask you, what was the impetus to put all of this in writing? What was the impetus to get this book out there on this topic?
Throughout my career, a lot of what I would call pretenders. Someone would get laid off. All of a sudden, they're a consultant. Somebody didn't work well in a corporate environment. They hung up a shingle and called themselves a consultant. And what was lacking were a standard set of skills and sensibilities that I believed were important for consulting professionals. The kind of learning, the kind of education you'd gain if you joined a McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG, one of those big firms. Right. Like you would learn a lot being in that type of environment. So that's one track. The other thing is that an enormous proportion, a disproportionate share of the literature on consulting, even today, the courses, the books, it's how to make $1 million as a consultant. Right. It's how to make money, have the life of your dreams. And no, stop. It's really hard.
Yes.
You're going to make nothing for a year or two, and be prepared for that. And if you want to make that kind of bread, you want to make a 7-figure income, you better be prepared to become a professional. You join the ranks of doctors and lawyers in terms of, economic status, if you will. You join it because you go through the same amount of rigor that they've gone through to get to that place. Right. And my thought was, why aren't consultants, why aren't we thought of as any other professional? Like we're doctors are problem solvers. Lawyers are problem solvers. Consultants are famously problem solvers. We're always solving a problem, whatever it is. And identifying that problem is job one. So why aren't we treated with the same respect, if you will? And it's because of the preponderance of pretenders that are out there running around calling themselves consultants.
You make an interesting point about the doctors and the lawyers that I had to chuckle. You know, it's, you go through 4 years of undergrad and you go through, you know, your medical school and your residency and you do all of that so that when you go into your doctor's office and you look and there's a diploma on the wall and a board certification, you have to pass the boards. And the lawyers, they've got to go through 4 years of law school and then they got to go pass the bar. And then you go and there's a diploma. It says, but anybody can say they're a consultant. There's no licensure. There's no certification. There's no accreditation. It's a really I had never really thought about it that way until I chuckled in the book.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Anyone can call themselves a consultant, and they're doing so in increasingly troublesome numbers, is what I say in the book.
Yes. Yep. Now,
so
I will
you
tell
lose
you,
your job,
though,
you're a consultant.
and exactly right. And I will tell you that as I was reading your book, one of the things that occurred to me is, okay, well, I'm not going to be that guy. Because you know, I spent 20 years in corporate. I decided that I want a different mode. I want a different pace. I want something just different out of my career. And so I became a consultant. And I'm saying to myself, man, he's talking to me. All right. So now I got to read this book now, and I've got to make sure that I do all the things to live into the expectations of a consultant now. So I'm not going to be one of those additional folks that Rob calls a pretender. So I'm invested.
I've known you for a long time. I mean, you know, and a lot of it's common sense, right? It's professionalism. You know, it's having credibility, doing what you say you're going to do. It's professionalism. It's mastering basics. One of the chapters in the book is master the basics. Like know at least the fundamentals of how to manage a project, of how to understand a workflow, a process, because all organizations are driven in one way or another by process.
Sure.
It's just have those really foundational skills. And I tie another analogy back to martial arts training, right? When I was a young kid, I wanted to spin and fly and kick, and I'm a gangly. You've met me. I'm 6'2", 165 pounds. I'm a gangly guy, not the most athletic fella, but I was determined, and so I joined a karate class in college, and for a year, I mean, it was just like the Karate Kid. It was a year of going across the dojo floor back and forth, and for 3-hour workouts back and forth, 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week, like insane workouts that I could never get through today. And it was just like Ralph Macchio in the Karate Kid. It was like, when are we going to get to the good stuff? I want to go, fly and kick somebody in the head. And it took, 3 or 4 years of mastering those basics before I could start to take the next step, and then the next step, and the next step, and you build upon it. And then I got my black belt, 4 years later or whatever. It's the same idea. It was a perfect metaphor for any profession. Like, how do you become that person who has that kind of cachet that they can get those kind of clients? Well, you're not going to walk into Microsoft on day one and tell them how to reorganize or tell them what their strategy should be. There's a little bit of seasoning that is probably called for before you can expect to do that.
You talked about the pretenders. And so those are kind of like the one-offs that kind of come out of the industry and then they hang the shingle. But you also spent a little bit of time highlighting a couple of specific use cases or case studies, I should say, highlighting a specific set of case studies around some of the bigger shops that are bona fide consultants that go through that consulting training, but they still don't deliver the value, or they don't eyes in the best interest, or there's something still wrong there. Talk a little bit about what you mentioned there.
And I don't like to dwell too much on this. I mean, and McKinsey is a great example. I have the utmost respect for McKinseyites and the McKinsey culture, and Marvin Bower, who kind of came in after James McKinsey passed away in the 1930s. And took that firm in a very particular direction and popularized the Master of Business Administration as a degree that was an attempt, like we're trying to do, to create a profession out of management consulting. Yet their hunger for more dollars, their hunger for bigger fees, they kind of rode that. Bauer, retired and then he passed away. And the firm has some very notable black marks, notable blemishes, not least of which is the opioid epidemic, where they advised the pharmaceutical industry how to promote opioids and how to spin the high rates of death around young abusers, and how to kind of thwart the mothers and fathers who are mourning the loss of their children. And they, it was I don't know what it was hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, sure, they generated. I speak about, they were hired by New York City Department of Corrections to figure out how to alleviate violence at Rikers Island, a notoriously violent prison. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think, a $27 million engagement, mm-hmm, which is staggering to me. And Rikers implemented McKinsey's recommendations, and violence went up. There was more violence. So it's those kinds of things that give our industry a black eye.
100%. And it's funny because of the two, kind of the pretenders versus that latter example, as I kind of do my own kind of pitching, it's really that is I really find the most struggle with is, oh, well, you're going to come in and give me a 300-page deck of blah, 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 blah that I'll never be able to read. I don't know that really is going to be a ton of value. And it's no, hang on. That's kind of not what my intention is to do. And so I almost feel, and again, I get this a little bit from your book, there's almost a little bit of a charge for all of us who call ourselves consultants to recalibrate our clients, our potential clients, on really what consultancy is supposed to be, which leads to a question I want to ask. One of the things that struck me is the accountability that I think also too lies with the customers to understand how to best engage and use and manage consultants that they bring on, that I see is so missed. There's this, you don't get fired for buying IBM or PwC or Deloitte or any of the big four. And so therefore, if you've got one of those big four behind you in consulting and advising, you can kind of take your foot off the wheel or hands off the wheel and let them go because, you hired the professionals. So do you have any thoughts on kind of what the obligation is to the client in this whole relationship that seems to be missing? Unfortunately,
and somebody told me this years ago, he said, companies hire consultants so they have somebody that they can sue when things go wrong, which I thought was cynical, but there's an element of truth to that because the uninformed buyer is just trying to transfer their risk, which is okay. Sure. But transfer their responsibility, which is not okay. Transfer the risk, sure, bring in the pros, but don't give up your responsibility. You still are going to be accountable for the outcomes from that, whether it's McKinsey or XYZ consultancy out of Bayonne, New Jersey. It doesn't matter. And apologies to XYZ Consulting. I don't know if that exists, but it may.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I have to say that, and I'm thinking of their names as right now as we speak, that there are a number of consultants from the big four, that are responsible for great successes in my career. And I'm very, very thankful for the work that they brought to me when I was at large enterprise. But I'd like to say also too, I'd like to think at least that a lot of that had to do with how I managed those relationships and those engagements. Taking the accountability, Absolutely. Making sure that they knew. And by the way, also too, being able to filter through the difference between the consultants and the salespeople, because they both carry the same business card working for the same company. And there's a difference. And I had to get burned a couple times to be able to tell who was who in that whole thing,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There are a couple of elements, Rob, in the book that I'd like to talk about. And by the way, there's another element of this that I want to bring to the fore, because anybody listening to this could easily say, I'm not a career consultant, so this is a wholly inapplicable conversation. And there could be nothing further from the truth, because everything that I read in your book could be applied to any leader in an organization being an internal consultant, trying to solve problems internally. And one of the things that really kind of stuck out to me is you talk about how, making an analogy to the medical practice, about how there's this notion where you've got these specialists and they all are responsible for the individual parts of the body, But rarely do those people, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, do they get into a room to talk about how all of these ailments from different parts of the body could be potentially coming from a single root cause. And you say, and you close this paragraph, this is precisely what is happening in our organizations today. What's the call to action there, Rob, just in terms of how we think about breaking down those organizational silos that prevent us from really getting at change, at necessary change in an organization?
That's a cultural phenomenon within an organization that's eminently fixable. In the medical profession, it seems to be more challenging, and maybe it's the same phenomenon. In the medical world, it's called defensive medicine, right? Your primary care physician sees some anomaly, and immediately sends you off to a specialist. That happened to me. And I talk about certain experience in the book. But I don't think I recounted this one. I had a quote unquote anomaly on an EKG. Doctor just sent me to a cardiologist, and I'm panic stricken. Like, what the heck? I have no family history of heart disease. And I get to the cardiologist's office. He looks at the old EKG, the one that my primary ran. He reads the EKG. He says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I don't know. My primary physician told me to come here." He said, "Well, your potassium level's a little low. Eat some bananas and do some yoga." Honest to goodness, that was it. But you run into that all the time. And within so there's that defensive medicine. Like, I don't want to be responsible if this is something that and you find that in organizations. I don't want to be responsible. And it's, it sets up territorialism. It sets up unhealthy competition within the organization. It sets up all kinds of, not in my backyard, or not, or not invented here syndrome, or that kind of thing. All of those phenomena are endemic in the corporate world also. And there's, of course, an industry built just around culture change and change management. Which is massive. And there are as many techniques for culture change and change management as I've had hot meals in the last 20 years. So
I love it. And I'll tell you, it was a very insightful piece because, and I'm actually on an engagement right now where it really was for me an unlock. It was a key unlock for me to say, hold on a minute, Miguel, your job as a consultant is to fly higher up. And to start seeing all of these things together. And that's where you're going to provide value. The client asks you to go look at X. That's fine. We'll go do that. But you've got to see the whole daggone thing before you can make recommendations. That was a call to action for me that just transformed the way I thought about the work I need to be doing.
Think holistically. You can't, because you're going to meet with a client or a prospective client who's going to say, my salespeople are terrible. They need training. And if you're selling, if all you have is a hammer and their problem is a nail to you, that's what you're going to sell them. You're going to sell them the hammer. You've got to look at the entirety of the organization. In that instance, it could be anything. It could be market conditions. It could be new competitive threats. It could be supply chain issues. It could be the inferiority or obsolescence of the product. It could be, there are any number of things. And if you're not asking questions at a strategic level, in order to fix that very tactical problem, you're going to potentially miss the forest for the trees. And that happens all the time also, because you see a cadre of consultants who are all too happy to take their clients' money because they are marketing experts or they're product experts or they're IT professionals. And they're not understanding the larger context in which that problem exists and how it arose, which, of course, would inform how to resolve it. Ultimately. So and I've gotten that from clients also. Like, don't worry about that. Right. We need you to do this. Like, I can't do this without understanding that. And if that's not a good fit, well, then good. We part friends, and I don't have a crummy engagement. So
No, that's a great way to look at it. I want to stick with the medical analogies here for a second and ask you for some advice. And again, I think it's advice not only for myself and others who are consultants thinking about their craft, but then also to just maybe even early career professionals. But you make this analogy of the kind of the specialists that are in their specific field, and then you talk about holistic medicine and the value that holistic medicine brings to the table. And I think that was very helpful for you in some of your journey. But here's my challenge with that. And here's where I need some advice. Forgive me because I don't have a lot of experience with holistic medicine, but I think if you were to talk with a lot of with people in general who don't have experience with holistic medicine, they would immediately assume quack.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so how do I position myself as the right type of holistician, if that's even a word, the right type of generalist that is, even though I have a technology specialization in insurance, I've got a little bit of some operations specialization, but I've been in the industry long enough where I think I can fly and kind of understand enough about all of the parts of it, but I don't want to come off like a quack and not be able to be a master of anything. What's your advice to how I position myself as I think through that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Your holistic perspective, see if this makes sense, is informed by your area of specialization. I'll use Jack Welch as an example, who was, until recently, considered one of the great managers of all time. I think that's debatable today, but in his heyday, he created a tremendous amount of shareholder value. He built a very reputable and respected enterprise in General Electric throughout the 80s and 90s. He was a chemical engineer. He started with so the discipline that was required to become get a doctorate in chemical engineering and work his way up through the organization kind of gave him that capacity, if you will, to understand on a much higher level, and know, and importantly, Miguel, know what he didn't know and knew which questions to ask as a result of knowing he didn't know things. So you preserve your credibility and you're not perceived as a quack when you say three really important words, I don't know. And so many consultants are very quick to say, sure, we can. I remember talking to a potential job candidate for us, and I just sensed he was not being completely straight with me, right? And I asked him a question. I said, have you ever worked with an LMX tabulator? And he said, well, yeah, of course I have. I've worked, honest to goodness, I'm not even kidding. And I said, okay, the LMX tabulator was something from the old TV show, The Odd Couple, which was made up. And let's say goodbye now, and good luck on your next interview. Yeah, own the fact that you don't know something. You know enough. Be confident enough in what you do know, and when there's a piece missing, especially as a starting out, build the holism of your consultancy by creating alliances with complementary service providers.
You finished the book with a couple chapters before the end of this concept of the courage to, and I remembered you said the courage to say I don't know. My favorite one, by the way, is the courage to shut up. That's my favorite one of all of those, because we have a propensity to want to talk, and we know how that kind of ends up for us.
In the past 8 years or so, I've been training as an executive coach. I think it's my afterlife beyond consulting, and I was I wouldn't say I was a terrible listener. I'm a much better listener now that I've gone through that kind of training, and I talk about some of that in the book. I talk about active listening and motivational interviewing, techniques that come from the therapeutic world that are applicable in the consulting world. So you really hear and reflect back to your client to gain that buy-in, gain that trust, and really understand and reflect back that you understand what their issue is.
I'd like to get also to your read on what I would call the state of talent in our industry. It's a topic, slightly off topic from a consulting perspective. I'm going to bring it back here in a second, but I think every carrier that I talk to, and even beyond just even the carrier ecosystem, is struggling with filling the talent pipeline, just given where things are. Do you have a perspective on whether or not that's true? Do you have a perspective on what we could be doing different to generate more interest for the younger folks who are contemplating their careers?
Some of it is just, again, common sense and age-old ideas, like have a compelling vision, right? Like really make sure you excite them. People, especially younger folks, in my experience anyway, want a good amount of autonomy when they're engaged. And if you're micromanaging them, they're going to quickly disengage and get bored. I think the introduction of everything from cloud computing to all of the subdisciplines around artificial intelligence and intelligent automation, robotic process automation. There's a whole world of things that are exciting, and rather than be insurance first, put that foot forward first. Talk about the excitement of the technologies that are being used to enable this $2 trillion industry.
Sure.
Number one, it's for those who are so inclined, it's one of the wealthiest industries on the planet. It's got more money than most, except for banking, perhaps. So there's that aspect of it, and a newfound need, in response to these upstarts, that we're seeing all over the place, to innovate, which was antithetical to how you would run an insurance company, they were always famously risk averse, right? That's their job, to manage risk. And they're run by, number crunchers and actuaries and folks and underwriters who are very concerned with, keeping the appropriate share of the pie so they can sustain operations. But here come these insurtechs who are flooded with, I guess, trillions of dollars in private equity and venture capital, and they had to be responsive. So you're seeing the more forward-thinking and forward-looking insurers. I'll use American Family as an example, setting up these kind of skunk works where they're innovating. They're encouraging that experimentation, that trial and error, that innovative culture that will attract a younger generation of thought leaders, of people. We've got a couple of developers on staff who are in their 20s who just blow me away because they're excited about certain things, and I'm jaded by now. Like, wow, you're excited about that. That's really Tableau. Is that exciting? Okay, awesome. Tell me about it. I want to hear about it. Like, what can we do with it? And there's like 15 new things that we can do with this thing that I've known about for years, and I got bored of it. So if you can tap into that intrinsic motivator, if you can tap into that aspect of the individual that makes them want to work just for the sake of doing the work, the joy of doing the work, and pull them into your organization with that idea, if you can, and be true to it. You have to be authentic and true to it, not just sell them. Then that's when we find that we're successful pulling talent into our consultancy.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating insight. I actually hadn't thought about leading with the technology and the opportunity, and kind of maybe leaving the insurance piece as a secondary element. That's fascinating. So I want to bring it back now because and I want to throw a bone to my second oldest. So I've got a guy. He's wrapping up his freshman year at the University of Arizona. He's doing all the really right things. A very amazing guy, and he's in Delta Sigma Pi, the kind of business fraternity. He is a member of the University of Arizona Consulting Club, and I was actually worked with his club on a little bit of a project. What advice do you have because by the way, I'm sending this book to all of his current class because I think that they all need to read it. What advice do you have though as the author, so that I can make sure that he gets this edition and he watches this episode? What advice do you have directly to him and his colleagues about a young consultant making his way through college and then hitting the world? How does he hit the consulting world using the right foot, building that right platform? What do you offer to Miles? His name is Miles. What do you offer to him and his
all right, Miles. Well, great for you, Miles. I mean, it can be a very, very rewarding career in many ways, not just financially, because when you solve a client's problem and they tell you, that they saved $3 million last year because of what you helped them to accomplish, that's incredibly gratifying. I think what you're asking me, Miguel, is what would I have done differently if I could do it all over again?
Yeah.
And I would have begged, borrowed, or stolen to get a more formal education sooner. Like I got my master's degree in 2015. Like I had taken graduate courses. It just took me many years to say, I should really understand this at a fundamental level. And it wasn't difficult for me by then because I had, through the School of Hard Knocks, had acquired a lot of the knowledge and the books, of course, that I had acquired and read through. So if you don't want to take don't want to take 15 years or 20 years to gain that knowledge, you can get a really good foundation in a year or two of grad school. That's just one thing I would say. But probably even more importantly than that, because there's so much inexpensive learning available through companies like Coursera or Udemy or whatever. Make sure you're a lifelong learner. Like you enjoy the process of learning. For me, anyway, that's the most rewarding aspect of consulting is that I'm 61 years old. I never stop learning. Every day I learn something new from a client or how to manage my own staff. And I still make mistakes. And we still botch client jobs, and we learn from them, and we pick ourselves up, and we move on. We make it right, and we move on. So I would say lifelong learning, be prepared for some hard work. If possible, if you can't get into a McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG, it's super, super competitive. Go to a North Highland or go to a second tier firm. They're excellent. Point B, I think, is still out there. There's some excellent second tier firms that are great training grounds for folks. And then you may ultimately wind up following in your father's footsteps and going out on your own, where I think that's the payoff, I think, for this.
Yeah.
For me, anyway, that's the payoff is being your own boss, so to speak. Now, yes, I work for a firm, but I've had a ton of autonomy. I was basically handed a desk and a phone, and the CEO said, "Go make me some money."
There you go.
So everything was an invention from those words of encouragement on. Everything was an invention.
Sure. So it's still entrepreneurial there. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Rob, you've been incredibly generous with your time. I want to once again plug the book, The Courageous Consultant, 7 Keys to Becoming an Exceptional Advisor. It is on Amazon. I actually bought 6 copies of it on the Kindle and sent it to every one of my associates on my team at 5M because I now consider this a required reading for everybody that joins my team, because I view it as kind of the onboarding manual to being a consultant at our company. So phenomenal read. Please go out and get it. Rob, again, thank you so much for all the time that you've afforded me here in this show.
Thank you for joining this episode of 5 Minutes. If you've enjoyed our discussion, we'd love for you to share it with anyone else you think might find it interesting. Also, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're listening on and hit that bell to stay on top of the game with our practical 5-minute episodes. We look forward to seeing you again next week.